Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight in Austin. I'm going to be joined in the next hour with Jakari Jackson, who's in Murrieta, California, at the site of these protests against the collapsed borders that are happening there. And, of course, it just broke in the news today that Obama is giving paid leave to the ICE agents in that area. Told them, just go away. We'll keep paying you, just don't do anything. If that isn't clear that this is about a planned takedown of the borders, I don't know what is. But we're going to have updates on what's going on there as they talk to people in the area. And I guess we kind of need to ask ourselves, why is it that the mass of the population is not really catching on to what's going on? What we have going on here is we've got a collapse at the border. It'll be an economic collapse. We also have a plan to make the country essentially blue. They want to bring in people that they can rebuild their socialist state with. So that's the other aspect of it. But then there's a third aspect of it, and that's who we're going to be talking to in the next hour as well, Dr. Jerome Corsi. Both he and I have talked about how Petraeus and Pelosi have said this is part of NAFTA. NAFTA was passed 20 years ago, as Petraeus pointed out, and now it is going to be made an accomplished fact. The North American Union is what comes after North America. When he made that statement, when that was part of the question that was coming up on the discussion panel, as a UK paper was live blogging it, the guy said, the question is, what comes after America? And he goes, I didn't really know America is dead. That's right. Most Americans don't know that either because they're not paying attention. There's an article that came up yesterday, Steve Watson on InfoWars. A study says that people would rather electrocute themselves than think for 15 minutes alone. 15 minutes without some kind of stimulus, without watching moving pictures on television, without listening to something, was driving them to such a state of distraction that they would rather shock themselves. And it was a significant shock. When they applied this to the people initially, it was unpleasant enough that they said they would pay $5 not to have it happen again. And yet, many of those people did it to themselves because they could not stand to be alone with their thoughts, to think about what's going on in their lives, in their family, in their country, whatever. That, I think, is really the problem that is at the bottom of this. We're going to take your calls. I want to put this out here. The 800 number is 800-259-9231. I want to take calls from law enforcement and people who are in relief agencies. I want to hear from you as to what you're seeing here as this border collapses. Again, that's law enforcement and relief agents. That's 800-259-9231. Before I take your calls, however, I want to tell you that this hour is brought to you by MyPatriotSupply.com. MyPatriotSupply.com is the home of the Patriot Pantry line of emergency food storage. It's delicious, nutritious, and it prepares in minutes. Patriot Pantry offers amazing variety, great taste, and is packaged to last up to 25 years. Visit MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex today to experience their top-rated customer service, top-quality products, incredibly reasonable prices, the products you need, the service you expect, the price you can afford. Visit MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex today or call 1-800-1866-229-0927. That number again is 866-229-0927. MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex. Before I go to your calls on immigration, I wanted to cover one other thing that's come out in the last couple of days, because the surveillance state, the ever-present surveillance state, is one of the things that puts us in ever-present danger. And, of course, as we reflect on the fact that they passed NAFTA 20 years ago, but they let it just simmer there, simmer in people's minds before they made it an accomplished fact, we should be very, very concerned about what's going on with the NSA. This is something that's been going on for quite a long time. Alex has been talking to people about this for quite a long time, but now we see a lot of information coming out about it. Is this really preparing people for the coming crackdown? Are we going to see something analogous to what's happening with the border collapse, with the establishment of NAFTA as a fact? Are we going to see that they're going to use this in new and novel ways? Well, of course, we've already had the NDA pass. We've already had them say that they believe that the entire world, including America, is at a state of war, and so the U.S. military can drag anybody off the street without telling anyone. They can hold you indefinitely, no trial, no due process, and no information about where you went. Essentially like Argentina. Do you remember the disappeared in Argentina? Do you remember that military junta there? They just picked people up and they just disappeared. Women were showing up to protest in tears about where their husbands were, where their sons were. And, of course, later they found out they were just putting them in helicopters and flying them out over the ocean and shoving them out of the helicopters. This is something we need to always be concerned about. But look at the latest revelation from the NSA. Of course, this is an article that came up yesterday, what your startlingly intimate voyeuristic NSA file looks like. A few days ago, we asked a simple rhetorical question, are you being targeted by the NSA? Well, let's take a look at some of the information that they're collecting on people. According to the Washington Post, files on intercepted Americans have a startlingly intimate, even voyeuristic quality. They tell stories of love and heartbreak, of illicit sexual liaisons, of mental health crises, of political and religious conversions, financial anxieties, disappointed hopes. Listen to some of the voyeuristic stuff that they're collecting. They get resumes from job hunters, academic transcripts of school children. You have a young girl in a religious dress in front of a mosque, or scores of pictures that show infants and toddlers in bathtubs or on swings, sprawled on their backs, being kissed by their mothers. In some photos, men show off their physiques. In others, women model lingerie, leaning suggestively into the web camera or posing risque poses in shorts and bikini tops. This is what the NSA is collecting. It's not your metadata. It's not your PIN data. They're collecting everything. And of course, what are they doing with that? Are they blackmailing powerful men? Are they blackmailing Supreme Court justices and others? You know, there was a story a few years ago about J. Edgar Hoover on The Guardian as the movie from Clint Eastwood came out, and they had an interesting quote from Harry Truman. He wrote about J. Edgar Hoover, and he said, "We don't want Gestapo or secret police. The FBI is tending in that direction. They're dabbling in sex life scandals and just plain blackmail. J. Edgar Hoover would give his right eye to take over, and all congressmen and senators are afraid of him." And I would add, presidents as well. Obviously, Truman was afraid of him as well. When we look at this, we need to understand with these NSA leaks, we need to understand the power that the NSA has. We need to understand how that kind of power has corrupted men like J. Edgar Hoover, or how I should say it draws men of the nature of J. Edgar Hoover into that position when that power is there. You know, tyranny is literally coming out of the closet. We've got the NSA now essentially channeling J. Edgar Hoover in the way that he blackmailed people. I think that is a large part of why the Supreme Court essentially reversed its trends and with a 9-0 decision last week said, no, the police must have a search warrant in order to look at people's cell phones. I wouldn't be surprised at all, and I've said many times that I believe Chief Justice Roberts was blackmailed when he wrote both sides of the Obamacare case, when he sided in a slim 5-4 majority saying that, yes, Obamacare was constitutional. It's not constitutional to mandate that kind of thing to anybody. I don't care if they call it a tax or anything else. They cannot mandate that you buy health care. That's not constitutional. They don't have the power. Under the 9th and 10th Amendment says that they haven't been explicitly given powers, then they don't have those powers. And yet we see people very selectively kicking back against it. We have an article up on Infowars.com today. Rick Warren joins leaders who are seeking religious exemptions on LGBT orders. That's right. Freedom for him, freedom for me, not for thee, essentially. This is what we see over and over again. People with a very narrow perspective who don't stand up for individual rights unless it affects them. That's what we've seen from far too many church leaders. You know, I was looking at some comments the other day. I don't remember if it was on the website or it was on YouTube. And somebody said, you know, I'm just fine. I know Jesus and I don't really worry about any of this stuff. And my response to that was, really? Really? You don't worry about what's happening to anyone else? You don't want to defend what's happening to your children? You don't want to protect them against a burgeoning police state? You don't want people spying on them? You don't have any compassion about that sort of thing. That's where the compassion needs to come from. The compassion is not creating a crisis in another country and then enticing people to endanger their children to come into this country. That's not compassion. Compassion is standing up for people in both countries and taking down the injustice that's there. If that's the way you feel, I really think you need to go back and check your religion. Is that really what Jesus called you to? I don't really know. Now, one piece of helpful news that we've seen come out of California, we see them opening up the gates to driver's licenses for people who are here illegally. And of course, as I pointed out in the last segment, it's a very different story from Governor Brown now than it was back in 1975 when he didn't want any Vietnamese immigrants in. Maybe it was because those people tended to vote Republican. Maybe that's what it's really about. I think it is. You know, for the longest time, they've been gerrymandering with computers, picking voters here and there, jumping across rows to select the voters that they wanted in which districts. Now they're just going to massively import them so that after they collapse the economy, they will have a Democratic majority to do whatever they wish. But there is one bit of good news that came out of California, and that is the California Assembly has voted unanimously to turn off resources to the NSA. This is a strategy that comes from the 10th Amendment Center's put together this offnow.org, and they point out that the California Assembly Public Safety Committee voted unanimously to approve a bipartisan bill which creates a mechanism to turn off all material support and assistance. They call it the Fourth Amendment Protection Act, and they said that it passed the state Senate last month by a vote of 29-1. That's pretty good. Now, if it's signed into law, it would ban the state from participating in or providing material support or resources to any federal agent engaged in the illegal and unconstitutional collection of electronic data or metadata without consent of any person, not based on a warrant that particularly describes that person, place, or thing to be searched or seized. In other words, it repeats the Fourth Amendment, but it has teeth in it. It pulls off the supply to the NSA. And we just had, if you're watching on video, we just had a clip up there of the protest that happened last week. There you can see the balloon. A very encouraging aspect of that was that you had Greenpeace, EFF, as well as the 10th Amendment Center, people coming from different perspectives and different issues, understanding that if we don't have a free society, then we have lost everything. We have lost on all of these issues. And of course, the 10th Amendment Center has put out this strategy. They've been trying to get people in Utah to pick this up because the massive data collection center there that is in Utah is using so much electricity and so much water that it's equivalent to a medium-sized city out there. And that was where they first started this idea. Now that's been picked up by the California legislature, and that's a very, very positive sign. So we'll see what happens with that. Going back to this NSA thing, though, there was an interesting article from Connor Friedersdorf, who writes for The Atlantic. And, of course, he was saying that this latest Snowden leak, in terms of the detail at which they're keeping these pictures and records of people, really should be devastating to people who are defending the NSA. And one of the things that he tweeted out, he said, imagine that John Edwards would have been elected without being caught in an affair and then told about the NSA data collection. Would he have crossed the NSA? Good question. That's the danger. There's a huge danger that we have in terms of our entire government being taken over, just as Harry Truman was saying J. Edgar Hoover wanted to run the entire government. And you could argue that effectively he did, because he had senators and congressmen and presidents who feared him, who feared his power to destroy. And of course, it has now come out in later years that he used that power quite a bit. And he was also incredibly racist. That's also come out in the memoirs that have surfaced from J. Edgar Hoover. But the question is, why do we allow that kind of power to be concentrated in the first place? That's the real problem with the NSA. When we go back and we look at people like J. Edgar Hoover, we have to realize that we don't just have an individual like J. Edgar Hoover. We have a Republican as well as a Democrat Congress that has now on 3 occasions passed the NDAA Act. They have now on 3 occasions said that they're not going to give Americans any due process, that they can be disappeared off the streets. That is what is so concerning about this collapse of the border, especially when you go back and you look at the documentaries that Alex Jones put out 7 years ago about Endgame, talking about how they were strategizing, collapsing the country by collapsing the borders, using that to create martial law. And so the question is, what, if anything, can we do about this? Can we even impeach Obama? Well, that appears to be what a lot of us would like to see happen, but now we're getting a lot of signs from the GOP that they have absolutely no intention of doing that. We see an article from Pat Buchanan where he's talking about impeachment being a bridge too far, and of course he's pushing a new book that he wrote on the Nixon administration. Pat Buchanan was part of the Nixon administration, and he says we need to understand that this is something we should stop. We should stop all talk about impeaching Obama. He says, Bill Clinton, the impeachers had a solid case of perjury. He said with Richard Nixon, they had a preponderance of evidence that at least for a time, he had sought to obstruct justice in the investigation of the Watergate break-in. But then he goes on to say, yet there is no evidence that Obama knew of the IRS plot to delay and deny tax exemptions to Tea Party groups. Well, that's simply not true. There have been connections that are essentially circumstantial, but it's not whether or not he knew that. It's whether or not he covered it up, just like Nixon. Nixon was not impeached because he did a burglary break-in. He was impeached because he covered that up. He was impeached because his Justice Department hid information from Congress, refused to turn over information to them. When you do that, you become an accessory to the fact. But what about Benghazi? What about Fast and Furious? It's not just the IRS scandals. The scope, the breadth, and the depth of what Obama is doing is far worse than what Nixon did. And so it's amazing to me that he would give a pass to them, and yet it's not just Pat Buchanan. We hear this from many GOP leaders. We see that Michael Steele said, I don't see a passion for impeachment, quite honestly. It obscures the issues that we want to talk about. And he says, I don't think Boehner or McConnell, those would be the leaders of the House and the Senate minority leader of the GOP, want to dance on that pen. People remember 1998. He said, the Tea Party even says, you have to learn a lesson from Clinton's impeachment. I think the lesson that these guys need to learn is they need to do the right thing. Even if they're not going to win, we need to tell them that there's going to be a penalty for this. They're going to have a price to pay. But we need to push to get this done. Of course, there's going to be people to take Obama's place. There's a gazillion people like Obama. He's just a figurehead.
This is Alex Jones for InfoWarsLife.com. The latest in preparedness is now here. An electrically stabilized colloidal silver solution that can be added to both your home cabinet and preparedness pack alike. Concentrated to 30 parts per million in what has been dubbed the survival silver solution. The new InfoWars Life Silver Bullet Colloidal Silver is the answer for you and your family. And it's entirely free of toxic artificial additives that are loaded into many products. The InfoWars Life Silver Bullet Silver is so powerful that it is concentrated into a 2-ounce bottle and is not recommended for extended continual use. This is not a low-grade formula. We are working with one of the top laboratory manufacturers in the United States to bring you the best form of colloidal silver using electrical processes within a base of deionized water for your preparedness storage. For your home kitchen, purchase your bottle of InfoWarsLife.com Silver Bullet Colloidal Silver today and find other amazing supplements at InfoWarsLife.com.
Of course, we've been talking about the border collapse, and we're going to continue to talk about that. We're also going to take your calls if you wanted to weigh in and give us your perspective on what's going on with that. And, of course, there's many different aspects to it. It's not just a border collapse. What's going to follow is an economic collapse because, of course, this kind of massive open border immigration is not sustainable. It's not sustainable economically. It's not even sustainable environmentally. But then what is going to take its place? Well, we already see in California that they are giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. They are very close to giving them voter registration. As a matter of fact, there's been a lot of reports, as Louis Gohmert in Texas said, of illegal voting in elections. It's very easy to do that if you've got ID, and of course they're going out of their way to give them ID. But the larger picture of this is the collapse of America, the destruction of America. As General Petraeus said, what comes after America? That's easy. North America. This has been going on, he said, for 20 years. We've had NAFTA. And so we're going to talk to Dr. Jerome Corsi in the next hour. We also have the InfoWars team on the ground in California. They're talking to both pro and pro-illegal immigration people, as well as those who want to see immigration handled in a legal and controlled manner. That is not what Obama wants to see. Obama has given ICE agents a leave of absence, a temporary paid leave of absence in the area right now where we have the InfoWars crew. That's Murrieta, California, where there's been a conflict between local residents and immigration there. And so he's given the immigration officers there just, take a break. I'll still pay you, but I don't want you to do anything to patrol our borders. Now, of course, the number to call in if you want to weigh in on this, we're going to be taking calls is 800-259-9231. A lot happened this last weekend. We had in Chicago, for example, 82 people shot, 14 dead over the weekend. Starting to sound like Central and South America. And there's a reason for that. It's not just that people possess guns. It's that we have a drug war. Remember when you had gangs shooting each other in the street with fully automatic Tommy guns, riding on the sides of cars, the original drive-by shootings? Yeah, that was during alcohol prohibition, wasn't it? As we've reported many times and interviewed people who are law enforcement, judges, prosecutors who have worked on the war on drugs, this is something that is still going on in Chicago. As a LEAP spokesman, Jim Gierach, who was a prosecutor in Cook County, told us 80% of the shootings in Chicago are related to drugs and drug gangs. But here's one example that came up yesterday. A veteran with concealed carry permit shot back at a Chicago gunman. This is an article from the Daily Caller. And of these 82 shootings, 2 of the people that were shot were in this particular incident. It was a couple of different groups, and one group came out, and a lady saw a bottle in a car and asked the other people if they would remove it. An argument ensued. One of the guys from the other group goes into his house, comes back with a gun, and shoots the lady a couple of times in the back. 2 other people in his group pull out guns and start shooting. Now, here's where it was different this year than it would have been last year. There was a veteran with a concealed carry permit in Chicago. In Chicago, the last state to allow concealed carry permits, Chicago. He shot back. He put the guy in critical condition that started the shooting. The other 2 fled, and that stopped more people from getting killed. That is how this is portrayed by the media, however, is that this is 2 more people who were shot without understanding that this is probably, most likely, gang-related. Most of these shootings are. And also ignoring the fact that guns were also used to protect lives. It's just like any other technology. It can be used to take lives. It can be used to protect lives. And this is something that would not have happened a year ago. Chicago now allows concealed carry, and the veteran protected this lady as well as other people in the group from that person who is now charged with attempted murder.
Alex Jones here to break down some exciting developments in the area of research concerning supplemental iodine. It's nothing less than phenomenal. I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. And I used some of the mainline iodine supplements, and they upset my stomach, and I had some issues with it. Until I discovered a product being developed by Dr. Group, who I was already interviewing as an expert on my radio show, and I began taking the product before he actually rolled it out. You now know it as Survival Shield True Nascent Iodine that your body can really absorb. Then, about a year ago, he said, listen, if you think this is powerful, I'm going to come out with rare earth, deep earth crystals that are incredibly powerful that no one else has as a source for their iodine from between 7,000 and 12,000 feet, literally drilled out of the ground. You put it on a hot plate and it turns into the pure gas. No one else has 99.99% pure iodine. And the results that I personally have had have been life-changing. I was over 270 pounds. And with the iodine, exercise, and better diet, I have lost now more than 50 pounds total, and I'm continuing to lose the weight. I have more energy, my libido, all this crap came out of my skin. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. This is innovating. This is trailblazing. And the best part is it helps fund Infowars.com, the radio show, the TV show, the whole media operation promoting true libertarian ideas. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox special at InfoWarsLife.com.